Hey guys, welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Today I'm going to be reacting to Peace, Revolution, and the Treaty of Versailles between two wars 1919, part 3 of 4. If you want to check out my previous reactions to Between Two Wars, remember the playlist card will be at the top. Just click on it and you'll be able to access them. Okay, let's start. 3, 2, 1, go.
It's 1919, and while a large part of the world continues to be at war, world peace is the topic in Paris. In many parts of the world, though, people rise up in rebellion to gain more rights, power, or self-determination. Change is at the center of the 1919 zeitgeist. Welcome to Between Two Wars, a summary of the interwar years, from the uncertainty and hedonism of the 1920s to humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. I'm Indy Nidell. It's easy to forget, but in 1919, the vast majority of the world had not yet achieved rule by the people, but were dependencies of ruling families. Out of those few countries that had become nation states or constitutional monarchies before the World War ended, only 4, New Zealand, Denmark, Finland, and Norway, were full democracies with universal suffrage before the November 1918 armistice. France and the USA, the 2 oldest nation states and the only ones created before the 19th century, were still not full-fledged democracies, as women or some ethnicities still did not have the vote. People now
Yes, I did not know about this. This I did not know about. Maybe because I didn't think about also about women's rights and also the minority rights of people living in these countries, like specifically the United States of America and France. But mainly America, because, you know, they've always been advertising themselves as the leader of the free world, you know, the democracy of all democracies. So when he said that only 4 nations really had a very democratic universal suffrage state, that kind of shocked me a bit there. Yeah.
now wanting a say in their own destinies creates national and international conflicts and is a central topic of the Paris Peace Conference. What happens there will have long-ranging consequences that still define the world as we know it in 2018. The Paris Peace Conference starts January 18th. The conference is an affair without the involvement of the losing Central Powers. The Allies negotiate amongst themselves through the winter and spring. At first,
Wait, so the losers are not here, it's only the winners who determine the fate of the rest of the European continent and the Arabian Peninsula and probably also in Asia, in some parts of Asia. Wow. And with no input of the people as well.
First, there is the Council of 10, 2 delegates each from France, Britain, the US, Italy, and Japan. It becomes the Big 4 when Japan drops out. The top representatives meet more than 145 times to make decisions that the General Assembly then ratify. The minor nations make recommendations, some of which become part of the various treaties because there is more than one. The Treaty of Versailles is the peace treaty that officially ends the state of war between Germany and the Allied powers. The other Central Powers sign separate treaties. A lot of nations are unsatisfied with the treaties, though. Italy has suffered big casualties in the war, but doesn't get most of its main war goals. Many of the French don't think the treaty is harsh enough on the losers. Japan neither gets all the territory in China at once, nor a clause on racial equality. China and Korea feel betrayed because Japan does get to keep territory in those places. King Faisal doesn't get a united Arabia and is instead caught in a complicated mess of colonial mandates between France and Britain. But the British promise him that he will get what he wants if he signs the Faisal-Weizmann Agreement, guaranteeing the Jewish state in Palestine as outlined in the Balfour Declaration. He signs and patiently waits for delivery on the promises. For now.
Since when have politicians ever kept their word at anything? No. It just did not, it's just not going to happen. Never did, actually. Now that we are in the future, as you could say, from their past. It never happened.
U.S. President Woodrow Wilson is concerned with rebuilding the European economy, but is more idealistic about free trade, self-determination, and mandates for former colonies. At the top of his list, creating a League of Nations to ensure world peace. Ironically, the United States Senate will refuse to ratify U.S. membership in the League of Nations. So in the end, what the U.S. president creates will go on without U.S. participation. Wilson opposes the harsh treatment of Germany, but France and Britain override him. The treaty requires that Germany accept the responsibility of Germany and her allies for causing all the loss and damage of the war. This is the war guilt clause, and it will cause huge resentment in Germany. Under the Versailles Treaty, Germany has to give...
Look how big they were. Germany, the German Reich, and Austria. Austria and Hungary? No, I think it's just Austria. I'm not sure. But yeah, they were very big countries before the end of World War I, it seems. They controlled vast tracts of territory. Yeah, this is interesting.
Give up Alsace-Lorraine to France. They have to recognize Czechoslovakia and Poland and give up land to them. They have to give up colonial holdings in Africa and the Pacific. By March 1920, the German army can number no more than 100,000 men. The general staff is dissolved, all arms trade banned, and limits are imposed on the manufacture of war material. The Navy is trimmed to just 15,000 men, and Germany is forbidden from having an air force.
Okay, but then in World War II, they had all of these things and more. So I'm just wondering who was meant to make sure that the Germans adhere to these demands. Yeah, like after winning World War I, who was designated to make sure that Germany would not return as a very powerful force as they did in World War II? How long was this deal supposed to take effect? Like, did it have an expiry date? And maybe the Germans just said, to hell with it. We're going to continue doing what we want to do until the advent of World War II. Yeah, I'm just wondering about that.
Reparations will be heavy, but it will take time to determine just how much. In the meantime, Germany is hit with a huge fine to pay for Allied occupation costs. The Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye declares the Austro-Hungarian Empire officially dissolved, and the soon renamed Austria and the other Central Powers have to, again, accept total responsibility for starting the war. Austria recognizes the independence of Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, later Yugoslavia. Austria has to give up over 60% of the empire's pre-war territory. Basically, the Allies have decided that all minority peoples want to leave Austria and have given all that land to successor states that happen to also include big chunks of German-speaking territory.
And this is where the problem starts. Lumping people together who were never lumped up before, German-speaking people now mixing up with people who don't speak German or who don't speak Austrian, who don't speak Czechoslovakian, who don't speak Slovenian, and whatever else, all now divided in these smaller countries without the input of the people on the ground. What do they want? Instead, these men in these large halls having their own negotiations decided that this is how the European continent is going to look like. Which is quite interesting, because this is something similar to what was happening when the scramble for Africa began. The European nations decided upon themselves that this is how the continent is going to be divided amongst everybody else, amongst all the people who are involved. And they cut through lines that literally went through societies and kingdoms and people across the entire continent. And we were divided like that. I'm not saying that we were one people back then either. I'm just saying that, it's interesting how this has occurred, but in Europe now, after World War I, where people in a small gathering room decided amongst themselves that new nations are going to be born out from this war, and we're not going to take the consideration of the people on the ground, how they feel about it. It's quite interesting.
The Austrian army is limited to just 30,000 volunteers. Austria is also forced to pay war reparations, still to be determined. The treaty also contains the Covenant of the League of Nations, so just like the Treaty of Versailles with Germany, the U.S. will not ratify it. And while the world leaders redraw maps, create new nations, and shift people across borders that didn't exist only a few months ago, these people are becoming agitated. There is a wind of revolution sweeping across the world. In most places, women don't have the vote. Minorities have fewer rights, and laborers do not have the same rights as their employers. In the colonies of the world, some people don't have any rights at all. For these people, though, the World War has given birth to new ways of thinking. Women have gone to work in traditionally men's jobs. Soldiers from the colonies, laborers and employers have fought, bled, and died together in the trenches as equals. So there's no way of just ignoring all of that and going back to the pre-war order. To find a way forward, people flock in masses to ideologies that have been around for decades but were considered fringe and unacceptable only 4 years ago. And these new ideologies are often mutually exclusive, and now they clash, often violently. Other parts of society cling desperately to the old ways and try to resist change. In Paris, while the peace conference continues, political extremists on the right and the left battle in the streets. In the U.S., racial violence breaks out in dozens of riots across the country, mostly whites attacking blacks, unable to deal with the demographic shifts in their cities as more and more blacks move in, but also from the demobilizations of veterans from the war as new competition for jobs and housing exacerbate ethnic tensions. The summer of 1919 in the U.S. becomes known as the Red Summer, not for communism, but for the blood that flows. The Egyptians rise up against their British colonial masters, but are quashed with force. In India, there's also unrest. Things escalate when British forces open fire on a gathering of pilgrims in a walled garden. Over 1,000 unarmed civilians died in what becomes known as the Amritsar Massacre. British Secretary of State for War Winston Churchill and Prime Minister Herbert Asquith seriously condemned the attack, but Colonel Reginald Dyer, responsible for the attack, later says during the inquiry that if he'd been able to get his armored cars into the garden, he would have used the machine guns. His aim was to cause terror. He succeeded.
I hope this commander was arrested and put into jail for the rest of his life. But for some reason, a part of me believes that he never even saw a prison. Like, he was free and he was forced to retire and he lived out the rest of his life with his family while he took the lives of so many innocent people.
In Eastern Europe, the White Army carry out the Kiev pogroms, killing, torturing, and raping dozens of Jewish Ukrainians simply for being Jewish, which is not the only anti-Semitic attack in war-torn Eastern Europe. People are also forcefully incorporated into new nations. On New Year's Day, 1919, the Czechoslovak Legion occupies Pressburg Free City and forces it to join Czechoslovakia. Now, by the 1910 census, that city was 42% German, 41% Hungarian, and just 15% Slovak. Still, it becomes Slovakia's capital February 4th.
I mean, imagine you just wake up one day and you're being told you're no longer part of the German Reich, or you're no longer part of Austria, you're now belonging to Czechoslovakia. And you don't speak Slavic, you speak German, or you speak Austrian. And now you're being told that this new system encompasses you as well. You are now part of it. If you don't like it, you can leave. If you try to resist, we might kill you.
February 12th, the German and Hungarian population protest against incorporation, and the Legion opens fire on them. And on March 27th, the city officially adopts the name Bratislava. There are strikes and labor conflicts in the U.S. Great Britain, and France, many of which end violently. The American Communist Party is founded and quickly attracts more than 50,000 members.
American Communist Party. Interesting. And where did that end up? Where did that end up? Oh, that's very interesting.
Also, in the U.S., an anarchist group, the Galleanists, send out 8 mail bombs, one of them almost killing future President Franklin Roosevelt and his wife Eleanor by mistake, as they just happened to walk by one of the targeted houses when it explodes. This extremist violence, the labor conflicts, and the general rise of communism gives rise to the Red Scare across the Western world. In the United States, Attorney General Mitchell Palmer has 10,000 suspected left-wing activists arrested. The Palmer raids at the end of 1919 result in over 500 U.S. residents and citizens forcefully deported and 3,000 imprisoned for their political views. Whether or not many of them were actually activists remains unclear to this day.
Deported where? Where were they deported to? And they deported like naturalized citizens of the United States of America. They deported them to other countries. I'm not entirely sure if I understand what is being said here, but that's interesting. Yeah.
It's a world of disruption and change. New countries, new borders, and new ideas are clashing with each other faster than they appear. The events in Paris in 1919, the fear of communism, the rise of fascism and Nazism, the struggle for self-determination, racial equality, and universal suffrage will define the next 2 decades, and in the end, be the main reasons that the hoped-for peace never comes. In one place, all of these issues are already creating chaos in this year. Germany, the loser in a war that was supposed to cement that young nation as a great superpower, is now in decline and chaos. In the next episode, we'll look at 1919 in Germany, as the German Revolution turns into a civil war, while the country teeters between communism and democracy. There, we will also meet the man who will come to symbolize the conflicts of the next 26 years in so many ways, Adolf Hitler. Now, to get our episodes ahead of time and to support the effort to make more content like this, join the Time Ghost Army on Patreon or directly at the timeghost.tv website. There, you can also sign up to our forum for free. Links are in the description. If you missed part 1 of 1919 about planes, automobiles, radios, and guns, it's right here. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to Time Ghost and World War II on YouTube. World War II, week by week, starts September 1st, 2018. See you next time. Remember, the revolution will not be televised.
Okay, guys, that was Peace, Revolution, and the Treaty of Versailles Between Two Wars 1919, part 3 of 4. Yes, after World War I, things were changing. People didn't want to go back to the past. They didn't want to be ruled by, the same power system that has always been leading the world for all this time, and they wanted change. But the victors of World War I had other ideas. They wanted to dismantle the nations that caused the war, if I can say that. They wanted to break them up into pieces, make sure that they would not have the military power to threaten the victors again. And in doing so, they also divided communities. They separated people who spoke the same language, people who practiced the same traditions and cultures and religions, and they separated them and putting them into smaller nations, like what happened with Austria, and the recognition of all the other nations around Austria now, and also in Germany, how Germany used to be such a large empire is now shriveled down to a very small one compared to how it was before World War I. And these men, these politicians in this League of Nations, decided this without the input of the people on the ground, and it resulted in a lot of confusion and chaos and death of many people, and really it was all an aim just to attain more power and more authority. Creating these smaller nations, they can control them as vassal states, probably, because they are so small. Their economic base is still very much destroyed after World War One. So the nations that won the war can still put their influence on these smaller nations and secure their own hegemony, if I can say that. And yes, things were very, very difficult during those times, in terms of minorities and their rights, workers and their rights, and also in Asia, things were also not going so well for China and for Korea. Japan was still the superpower and dominant player in the Asian region of the world. Whatever they wanted, they got without any objection, because they are the powerhouse in Asia. Of course, China and Korea, they did not agree to this. They did not want to entertain this. The fact that Japan is now controlling vast tracts of their own territory, and also the colonies of Britain, probably also France, were up in arms. They wanted to have their own independence. They wanted to have their own freedoms. They were put down with violence. In India as well, they also experienced a lot of painful and just unnecessary attacks from the colonizers, who are the British, during that time. And really, I just couldn't understand why would this, was it a colonel, attack pilgrims. I mean, I'm assuming those pilgrims were there just to go to a temple to pray, or to worship, but not people who were holding weapons and trying to fight against the colonial government. So I don't know why they were shot dead. But anyways, yeah, things were really changing across the world. But we weren't really focusing on South America. I wonder what was happening there in South America. We've been talking mainly about Europe and then a bit of Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, Asia, and the North America. But we didn't really focus on South America, what was happening there. I'd also want to find out what was happening there during, or should I say after World War One. Yeah, it would be very interesting to hear about that. Okay guys, that's it for today. Remember, if you liked the video, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos. And I guess I will see you next week, Tuesday. Okay, bye-bye.